everyone, welcome to Do You Believe? I'm your host Noreen, and guess who's in the studio with me tonight?
Hello everybody.
Tim. In case some of you are new to the show, Tim Wood often co-hosts with me on shows, and he is also the founder and creator of LIVESCIFI, and he's the director of my show. So welcome everybody, welcome to the chat room. Hi everybody, I can't see who's in chat, but hi, thanks for coming. Thanks to the moderators. Now before we start the show, you know what we want from you. Please give us a like, and also please subscribe to the channel. We'd really appreciate it. Now tonight, I have an awesome guest with us. His name is Ken Gerhard. He is a monster hunter, an accomplished cryptozoologist, and he is a field researcher for the Center of 14 Zoology and the Gulf Coast Bigfoot Research Organization. He has investigated reports of monsters and mysterious animals around the world, including Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, Chupacabra, and winged creatures, even werewolves. In addition to appearing in 3 episodes of Monster Quest, Ken is featured in the History Channel, the special Real Wolfman, as well as Legend Hunters on the Travel Channel, A&E, Paranatural on the National Geographic, Ultimate Encounters on True TV, and Weird and What with William Shatner on the History Channel. So tonight, he's also the author of 3 books. Big Bird, Modern Sightings of Flying Monsters. He is the co-author of Monsters of Texas. And your latest book, Ken, Humanoids, Encounters of Flying Humanoids. So let's all welcome Ken to the show. Thanks, Ken, for joining us tonight.
Good evening, Noreen, and also Tim. Thank you so much for having me on. It's
Thanks,
definitely
Ken.
an honor to be here.
Thanks,
Well,
Ken.
I'm so honored to have you because everything you do is, I would die to be able to do what you do because I love monsters. Oh my God, that's my favorite subject. And Mothman, I'd really like to start with Mothman. Oh, and by the way, viewers, tonight we're going to cover 5 subjects. 3?
Did you
Yeah, I did. Yeah. We're going to cover Mothman, and then following Mothman, Big Bird. And the Indians call it Thunderbird. The Jersey Devil, werewolves, and Bigfoot. All of my favorite subjects. I love them. So Ken, honey, why don't we start with Mothman?
Wow, well, that's a great way to start any conversation, I think. Mothman is probably one of the creepiest and weirdest figures in the annals of the unexplained. I don't know if I'd really consider this true cryptozoology, which is what I'm really into, but I have written a book, as you mentioned, Noreen, called Encounters of Flying Humanoids, because, you know, cryptozoologists are often fascinated with all types of and manner of mysterious creatures, and Mothman is definitely mysterious. Most people have probably heard about the movie, The Mothman Prophecies, based on an excellent book by John Keel. The movie, of course, starred Richard Gere. And this is based on true events, but the story of Mothman goes back to 1966, and specifically November 15th of 1966. There were 2 young couples that were cruising kind of a lover's lane area near the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and this is a very rural part of West Virginia, very close to the Ohio River and the border with Ohio. And as they were touring through an area in their car, an area that was known to locals as the TMT area, because back during World War II, this particular location had been the site of ammunition's manufacturing plant. It was now kind of abandoned at this point, but as they were driving through this area, they suddenly noticed this very tall figure standing about 6.5 feet tall, maybe 7 feet tall. And as they looked at this thing, they realized that it was shaped like a man, but much to their horror, it actually had gigantic bat-like wings attached to its back or shoulders. And they all commented that it had these enormous red hypnotic eyes, these giant burning embers that were, basically putting them into a trance. And as they watched this figure, it kind of shuffled awkwardly towards the entrance of an abandoned building. And that's when they kind of lost it, and they just took off out of there in their 57 '67 Chevy, and they were shooting down the highway back to Point Pleasant. And as they did so, they realized that the Mothman was actually chasing them. And it was flying at impossible speeds. They apparently were doing about 100 miles an hour in their car, and this thing was right behind them, gliding just above their car. And they could hear it making a kind of a strange mechanical squeaking noise. It didn't seem to be flapping its wings. It was just gliding very fast, peering in at them. And right when they got to the edge of Point Pleasant and the city lights, the thing vanished.
Oh my God.
And they were so horrified by this encounter that they went to the local sheriff's office and filed a complaint. And the deputy who was on duty could see that they were visibly shaken, obviously, and just, extremely in shock. And so he led them, begrudgingly, he led them back to the area to look and see if they could find the thing again, which they didn't. The following morning, the local sheriff in Point Pleasant actually held a press conference, and he told the media about this incredible encounter the night before. And as you can expect, it became national headlines.
Mm-hmm.
People all over the country and all over the world were talking about the Mothman. The name Mothman, in fact, was a construct of the media. They kind of came up with that nickname, but it stuck. And the following evening, there was another remarkable sighting that involved a woman named Marcella Bennett, who claimed that the Mothman rose up behind a car that she was walking to and scared her so badly that she fell on top of her infant child and almost smothered it to death.
Oh my God.
And then there were just a number of sightings after that for a period of weeks. It seemed like Mothman hysteria hit the area around Point Pleasant. Many people claim to have seen it, to have been chased by it. At the same time, there were apparently other weird things going on in Point Pleasant as well. There were UFO sightings aplenty. There were mysterious visits from men in black who were coming around and threatening people who had seen the Mothman. This went on for about a year, and then in December of 1967, events sort of culminated tragically when the Silver Bridge, which was a giant suspension bridge over the Ohio River there in Point Pleasant, collapsed right before Christmas during rush hour traffic. And a number of cars plunged into the icy waters of the Ohio River, and sadly, about 46 people lost their lives. Now, what's interesting, Noreen, is that, immediately after this tragic event, sightings of the Mothman seem to have stopped abruptly in the area around Point Pleasant, which led many of the locals to believe that there was somehow a connection or a link between the Mothman sightings and encounters and this tragic bridge collapse.
Right.
And to this day, many of the people in Point Pleasant still feel that way.
So they say that he usually appears. Yeah, and they say he usually appears when there's going to be a disaster. But did anything else happen in Point Pleasant besides the collapse of the Silver Bridge?
Well, the economy has been rapidly deteriorating there over the years. I don't mean to be laughing at their expense, but that's something that I've heard many locals tell me. It's just been at one point it was kind of a boom town, and it's still a nice little community, but it certainly has not done that well. But no, there haven't really been any real Now, there was one interesting event a few years ago. The TNT area is actually still home to a series of these concrete storage bunkers called domes, concrete igloos, where TNT and other hazardous chemicals were stored, and many of these were abandoned. And just a few years ago, one of these concrete bunkers actually blew up and contaminated the area. So they had to close down a large portion of the area surrounding the TNT plant. But other than that, nothing really tragic that I'm aware of. But that bridge collapse was pretty horrible.
Ken, is there any? Did people know why the Mothman surfaced in Point Pleasant? Do you think it was because of Chief Cornstalk, or why do you think has there been any thoughts to why he just suddenly appeared?
Well, that's a great point, Tim. The Chief Cornstalk curse is another curse that predates the Mothman situation, of course, by a couple hundred years. But that was a Shawnee chief who was apparently slaughtered by the U.S. Army following a bloody battle. And as so the story goes, on his deathbed, he swore that he was going to curse the area around Point Pleasant. And so a lot of people think that there's, again, a connection between the Mothman and the Chief Cornstalk curse. It's a very complex, multifaceted mystery. It's got a lot of very interesting angles. Some people think that the Mothman was an extraterrestrial visitor, interdimensional being. Many people do view it as kind of a
Has there been any other like cultures or any other places where in the past people have seen something that looks like Mothman?
Well, that's the interesting thing, because, despite the fact that most people are aware of the Mothman incident, my new book, which is going to be coming out in September, Encounters with Flying Humanoids, actually covers the flying humanoid phenomenon, it apparently dates back at least, 10,000 years. If you look at, like, the ancient Sumerians, who believed in these beings called the Abkal, Abkalu or Abgal. The ancient Sumerians worshipped winged demons like Pazuzu. You have all these ancient references in different cultures around the world, and then you still have modern sightings. I've received many sightings of flying humanoids. Many of them I discuss in the book, but some of them are quite recent. I had a gentleman that claimed he saw a creature like Mothman just this past year. There was another gentleman near Point Pleasant who got in touch with me who had an apparent Mothman sighting about a year and a half ago. So, it seems to be an ongoing phenomenon. And these things are being seen everywhere, not just in Point Pleasant, but all over the United States and all over the world.
Now, have people actually had any other interaction with them besides just seeing them? Like, have they been any abduction reports, or is it just mostly people see them and they're kind of like omens?
I'm not aware of any abduction reports. Of course, if somebody went missing,
yeah.
well, they don't abduction, we just never heard about it, But most of the interactions are the same. It seems like, and I kind of talk about this in the book, that these beings, whatever they are, seem to feed off of our fear. They seem to get a real thrill out of just scaring the jeepers out of people, chasing people, staring ominously at us. Never really attacking or physically assaulting. Just kind of, it seems to be kind of a morbid curiosity on their part. So, again, there are many cultures where these beings are viewed as essentially bad omens, that they appear right before catastrophes or calamities. And then in other situations, they're viewed as sort of, I guess, watchers or observers that are sent here, perhaps messengers or demigods of some type.
Well, since he appears supposedly before a disaster, did they find out why the bridge collapsed? Did they ever find out what happened?
Actually, that's a great question, Noreen. There was a specific I-beam. The bridge was built, many decades before 1967. I can't remember the exact year, but it was just after the turn of the century. They never really anticipated the type of traffic that was going to be going across this bridge. So it took a lot of abuse over the years, and in addition, it gets very cold up in Point Pleasant, so it froze many times, every winter. So it was a situation where the metal was hardening and then getting brittle. The parts were getting old and rusty. There was a lot of weight. At the specific time when the bridge collapsed, it was basically traffic jam right before Christmas on an icy road, and then, so it was basically a disaster waiting to happen. But there was a specific I-beam, on one of the, that kind of gave, or not I-beam, but kind of one of the links in the chain, so to speak, gave way, and that was kind of like the beginning of the end, so to speak.
Oh,
but
nice.
it very well, it wasn't a completely freak thing, because the bridge was very old and it had been used quite a bit, and it probably had just been used more than it had been designed for.
I see. All right, so why don't we move on now to Big Bird, and the legend is that the Indians used to call it Thunderbird, but your book is Big Bird.
Big Bird, of course, many people will think of
Sesame
Street or Mitt Romney or something, but Big Bird was actually, again, like Mothman, Big Bird was a media name, and they did kind of draw that from the Sesame Street series. But Big Bird is a subject which is near and dear to my heart. It's one of the first book I wrote, of course, and it's something I've been very actively researching for years. As you mentioned, there are many Native American tribes that believe in these creatures known as thunderbirds. And the name Thunderbird implied that these birds were so enormous that they could essentially, the beating of their wings sounded like thunder. In many legends, they blocked out the sun when they flew overhead, and in many legends they also were accompanied. Their presence was accompanied by really bad storms and bad weather. So again, hence the name Thunderbirds. But what's really surprising is that in modern times we have a lot of reports of these giant bird-like creatures. There seem to be high concentrations of them in specific areas. For example, here where I live in South Texas, also in Pennsylvania, Illinois, Alaska, and so forth. And the sightings are typically pretty similar. Actually, I should explain there are two kind of distinct groups or delineations of thunderbirds. One type are described as essentially giant raptor types of birds, very dark in color, similar to vultures or condors or perhaps dark eagles, and having a wingspan anywhere from 15 to 25 feet across, which of course is like 5 times larger than any known bird. Well, I should say maybe 3 times if you count the condors, but essentially the size of small airplanes. And then the other types of reports are people have described something that looks very prehistoric, and they often tell me that these creatures that they've seen are completely featherless, that they have kind of a rough hide type skin, and that they look very similar to the pterodactyls and pterosaurs that were contemporary with the dinosaurs millions of years ago. So not birds, in fact, but actually specialized flying reptiles. So it's interesting that I receive reports of both types, but generally people refer to both types as thunderbirds, even though one group are actually reptiles.
Has anybody ever been carried off by one of those birds?
Well, there's actually a very famous story known in cryptozoology as the Lawndale incident. And back in July of 1977, in the town of Lawndale, Illinois, which is in kind of rural central Illinois, there was a young boy named Marlon Lowe who was running around playing in his yard with his friends. And he's a very small boy. I believe he was about 9 years old, weighed maybe 60 pounds. And in front of several witnesses, including his friends and his mother, these 2 giant black birds swooped down from the sky, and one of them actually grabbed Marlon by his clothing and dragged him in the air for several feet as he was kicking and screaming. But he did manage to break free, and I guess one of these birds dropped him on the ground, and then they kind of both flew off.
Oh my God.
So again, this is witnessed in front of many people, and local wildlife investigator or officials tried to explain the sighting away as they were turkey vultures or some other known bird. But this is really quite remarkable because 60-pound human, even though it's a very small human, there's really no known birds or animals that could pick up or support that kind of weight.
Well, then if they carried off of a human, they probably carry off animals as well, smaller animals.
Well, yes, that would certainly make sense. It's true that very large eagles and certain types of raptors will attack. For example, baby deer, baby goats, animals about that size.
Yeah.
It's more common that they're going to go after something like rabbits or rodents or things like that. But yeah, attacking humans, that's pretty rare. But the Lawndale incident is very famous because there were so many witnesses. Marlon Lowe, of course, a grown man, but to this day he swears by what happened to him, and that the bird that picked him up or attacked him was not a known bird. That it was something quite remarkable.
Wow. Any questions from the chat room? Okay, so now we're going on to the Jersey Devil. Love the Jersey Devil.
Yeah, everybody loves the Jersey Devil. That's a great legend. And it kind of ties a little bit into the big bird Mothman because it's reported as having wings, but seems to be very, very different. The Jersey Devil is, of course, a very famous legend that stems from the southern part of the state of New Jersey. And most people think of New Jersey as kind of a bustling urban area, but most of New Jersey is actually quite rural.
Yes,
and
I've
in fact,
actually
in
been.
southern New Jersey, you have this vast area known as the Pine Barrens.
Yes, I actually visited the Pine Barrens. I've
Oh,
been
really?
there. Oh yeah. Well, my family's from back east, Philadelphia, New Jersey, and we went to the Pine Barrens. But I didn't know anything about the Jersey Devil at that time. This was years ago, and what a creepy feeling! It's so close and tight with all those big trees, those redwoods, and it was really tight knit and was very, very. You get a really creepy feeling in the Pine Barrens.
Yeah, it's a creepy area. I have a friend that lives there, a fellow researcher, and he tells me a lot of cool stories. But anyways, they're in the Pine Barrens. This is how there's several versions to this legend, but the most prevalent one is that back in the early part of the 18th century, I believe it was in the 1730s, there was a woman known as Mrs. Leeds, and Mrs. Leeds had apparently given birth to up to this point to 12 different children, and
But this is folklore, isn't it?
this is really more folklore, but this is what the locals. This is how they like to explain it. And her husband was apparently always away, wasn't really home, and so she felt overwhelmed all the time. Well, at some point she got pregnant with her 13th child, and on a dark and stormy night, as she was giving birth to this 13th child, and with some midwives present, she actually, as this child was born, she cursed it to be a devil, and it apparently turned into this horrible winged monstrosity, a demon, if you will, and flew out the window or perhaps up the chimney and disappeared into the Pine Barrens, and that was how the Jersey Devil was born. Sightings of the Jersey Devil were sporadic, or reports of the Jersey Devil, I should say, were sporadic during the 18th century, and throughout the 19th century as well. But there was a series of events that took place in the year 1909, and this is where the Jersey Devil really becomes famous. And in the year 1909, there were, similar to Mothman, there was just a series of sightings of this creature that most people believe to be the Jersey Devil. They kind of started in different towns, Camden, New Jersey. There were some sightings across the river in Pennsylvania as well. Mostly southern Jersey. Don't remember all the towns. Burlington Township is one. The descriptions were all very similar, and the descriptions of this creature were that it stood about 3 to 5 feet tall, with a body shaped like a kangaroo, a face like a dog, and a kind of a horse's head, with a very long neck attached to its body and 2 bat-like wings attached to its back. And it was also cloven-hoofed, and that it had a very long, sort of spiraling reptilian tail. And some people also described it as having glowing eyes and horns.
So Ken, all the eyewitnesses that they had on this Jersey Devil, were they mostly all the same description?
They were very similar, although they varied somewhat. And, even though it's a great story, and I'd love to tell everyone out there that the Jersey Devil was based on absolutely true events, I think it's important to point out that, at the time, 1909, there were, all of the stories were coming out of the newspaper, the local newspapers. And at that time, newspapers were not always necessarily concerned with telling the gospel truth or reporting facts. Oftentimes, it was really more about selling newspapers and sensationalism. So there's really a good chance that some of these newspapers were in competition with each other and were just basically trying to outdo each other with these fabulous stories and sightings. There was a story about how the Jersey Devil dive-bombed a trolley car, causing it to crash, that it was attacking people's dogs, that it let out this horrible, mournful, wailing sound when it flew overhead. But the most famous sighting involved a family, or a man named Nelson Evans and his wife. And they claimed that they woke up one morning and saw the Jersey Devil prancing around on the roof of their barn. And there was a famous illustration based on their description that appeared in a local newspaper. And this is the enduring image of the Jersey Devil that most people think of. But abruptly after a few weeks, the Jersey Devil kind of disappeared, or more or less disappeared, and there really weren't a lot of reports. I mean, there have been sporadic articles in the newspaper and people that have claimed to have seen something in that area. In fact, in my book, Encounters with Flying Humanoids, I actually published for the first time a fairly recent sighting of the Jersey Devil that, sounds, to my mind, is pretty remarkable. And I've interviewed this particular gentleman several times, and he's convinced that what he saw was the Jersey Devil. So,
Does he live in the Pine Barrens?
at the time he was growing up, well, he doesn't live there now. He lives in Jersey, but at the time he was living in Yardley, which I believe is a small town in Pennsylvania, just across from the Barrens.
Is that
near
where
the
he?
Delaware River.
So where did he see it? In the Pine Barrens or in his
No,
town?
he was actually across from the Pine Barrens in Pennsylvania when he saw this thing. It ran out in front of his car. He got a good look at it because he had a spotlight on at the time, and he described it as kind of a weird, kind of a winged monkey type of creature with a very long tail and a wet, shaggy fur, and pretty bizarre stuff. I mean, I don't know. From a scientific point of view, there's not a lot we can say about the Jersey Devil because it seems to blend the characteristics of different types of animals, and it's pretty impossible, from an evolutionary standpoint, to imagine something that would have wings and a monkey's body, and but who knows? Maybe we're dealing with something kind of supernatural.
Do you go out there at all to see if he still exists or check him out? Check out the area? Your friend lives in the Pine Barrens, right?
I know, and he's been inviting me for a long time, but unfortunately, I haven't ever made it up to the Pine Barrens. I would love to go investigate, just to take a look around and kind of soak in some of the creepiness myself. That's definitely on my bucket list.
All right, so
I haven't made it there yet.
well, you should go. All right, let's move on then.
Wait, there's a question in chat.
Question, okay.
Criticism is asking, are there any reports of the Jersey Devil in other states besides New Jersey?
That's a good question. I haven't really uncovered any reports that are strikingly similar. There are a couple that I guess are noteworthy. In England, there's a creature that's been reported known as the Brentford Griffin, and it was cited mainly by one eyewitness on 2 occasions. This was back in the 1980s. In southern London, this gentleman named Kevin Chippendale claimed he saw a creature that he described as a flying or a winged dog soaring overhead a couple of times. And there's some other people that came forward that claimed they saw this thing as well. So that's probably the most similar thing.
Was that the same as?
There have also been other winged gargoyle types of creatures reported in the states of California and also here where I live in Texas. And I guess that's the closest thing you could equate to the Jersey Devil, as kind of a winged gargoyle creature with dog-like or primate-like characteristics and wings.
Is the first creature?
This is interesting. There's also, and this pertains to the big bird and also perhaps Jersey Devil. There's a famous legendary creature, the Illinois tribe of Illinois believed of a creature that was known as the Pyasa, and the Pyasa was actually a winged demon-like creature that they greatly feared. In fact, the word Pyasa means bird that devours men. And near the town of Alton, Illinois, which is on the Mississippi River, at one time there was apparently this giant petroglyph that had been painted on this sheer rock wall that overlooked the Mississippi River of the Pyasa. And hundreds of years ago, Indians, braves used to, as they were rafting down the river, they would actually shoot arrows at this giant petroglyph to show their contempt for the Pyasa. But the Pyasa actually seems to have many of the characteristics of the Jersey Devil. It's got the long, devilish tail, the bat-like wings, and kind of a dog-like face. So that might be fairly similar.
Have you ever heard of Spring-Heeled Jack?
Of course.
Okay, is that the same?
Jack.
Okay, is that the same as the first thing you mentioned? I forgot the name that you were saying in the UK.
The Mothman?
No, the other creature you were just talking about in the UK.
Brentford Griffin.
Yeah.
No, Spring-Heeled Jack is completely different, but I do cover Spring-Heeled Jack in my book as well.
Okay.
Spring-Heeled Jack is a man-like figure that was reported in the suburbs of London beginning in about the year 1735, and made the newspapers quite frequently. And Spring-Heeled Jack is kind of an interesting character, almost a mixture between an urban legend and a supervillain. People described him as a very tall, thin man that was wearing sort of a paratrooper-type uniform and a cape.
my
through the
God.
air.
How many
in a very
witnesses?
inhuman way, and
How many witnesses?
terrorized parts of London for many years.
Oh my God, how many witnesses do they have of that?
Well, I mean, there were many, but again, we're dealing with newspaper articles that may have been slightly sensationalized. In fact, there was a comic book that later came out that was dedicated to Spring Hill Jack in the 19th century. But Spring Hill Jack was definitely a concern at the time, and in fact, the governor, or not the governor, but the rulership of London actually formed sort of vigilance committees and posses to go out and try to capture Spring Hill Jack, but they were never successful. But he's a very dubious and fascinating character, and I felt like he needed to be included in the book as well.
Wow. Any other questions, Tim, on
No,
that?
no.
Okay, so let's move on to werewolves. Now, I have to ask you, you know about the Werewolf Syndrome, where all of a sudden it'll show up in a family, and it seems to be East Indians that have this. Have you ever seen that before, the Werewolf Syndrome, where they look like werewolves?
I believe you're referring to hypertrichosis.
Yeah, and they also call it the Werewolf Syndrome.
Yeah,
And
it's a genetic condition where, a person is essentially completely covered in hair. And you're right, there were some people from the East Indies. There was a woman from Mexico. There was actually a family in Mexico that I guess those are the most famous people that are alive that have this particular syndrome. Many people have referred to these people, which are ordinary. They are ordinary people, other than the fact that they're just completely covered. The faces are covered in hair, which makes them look very bestial. But many of them have actually, in fact, been involved in carnivals and circus sideshows because it's such a strange-looking condition. But the fact about hypertrichosis, from my research, Noreen, is that it is so extremely rare. I mean, the odds of someone being born that way are like, 1 in billions. There literally been only 50 cases of hypertrichosis that have been documented in history. So, I mean, it's very, very rare. So, I mean, it's a possibility. It's definitely a possible factor. But, I don't think it's necessarily going to explain the entire werewolf legend.
okay, so let's then explain werewolves then.
Well, of course, it's not going to be easy to just explain werewolves. People are familiar with the concept of werewolves, and I believe a lot of that they get from Hollywood movies, the movies like The Wolfman and so forth, The Howling.
Okay, is it true? Is it true that they only come out at a full moon?
In some cultures, that is a belief. Now, the belief in werewolves was very widespread in Europe during the Middle Ages. And at that time, werewolves were, often associated with the devil or witchcraft. It was believed that werewolves were ordinary people that had essentially made a pact with the devil, not bitten by a werewolf per se. Again, that's a kind of a Hollywood thing, but these were people that had made a pact with the devil or perhaps had been cursed. And, that they would basically turn into wolves and not necessarily during a full moon, but when they wanted to, and they would achieve this sometimes by rubbing a kind of an oily substance on their bodies that gave them this ability, or oftentimes they would put on a wolf belt or a wolf fur, and then they would run amok as werewolves and attack people. Some of this may stem from Native American, at least in the Americas, we have indications of things called shapeshifters, which many Native Americans, including the Navajo and Hopi, believe that humans could actually transform into animals. In Europe, some of that may have been derived from the Norse berserkers, which were essentially Viking warriors who would often put on these animal furs before they went into battle, and they would behave in such a savage manner that people had believed that they had actually become animals. But there are many werewolf legends all over the world, of course. The most famous one that I've investigated involves a creature known as the Beast of Gévaudan. And this took place in southern France in the 1760s. And there was apparently a creature that many people believed to be a werewolf that attacked hundreds of people, killing anywhere from 60 to 100 people, according to death certificates, and causing the entire nation of France to go into hysteria, and also causing King Louis XV to act by sending
So in folklore, the werewolf would bite them, and then that person would become a werewolf. But in the folklore that you're describing, they would actually kill their victim.
Yeah, they wouldn't just bite them. They would basically eat them.
Oh, eat them. Oh, okay.
A significant portion of it, you know.
Okay.
So the Beast of Gévaudan was apparently its reign of terror lasted about 3 years, and it was ended by a hunter named Jean Chastel, who apparently shot the beast with silver bullets that were blessed by a priest, which is where we get the whole notion of silver bullets being lethal to a werewolf. And the beast was paraded in front of many towns after it was killed, and then it was subsequently taken to the palace in France where King Louis was not impressed by its smelly remains and ordered that they be buried. So to this day, it's still a bit of a mystery exactly what the beast was. There are some different theories out there that are quite intriguing. But this is where we draw a lot of our knowledge or inherent knowledge about werewolves. Now, what's cool about werewolves is that there's some very modern reports. In fact, a good friend and colleague of mine named Linda Godfrey, who's based in Wisconsin, has written several excellent books about modern werewolf reports that have emanated from all over the country, but primarily in Wisconsin and Michigan. And there's a creature, in fact, known as the Beast of Bray Road that's been sighted up in a town called Elkhorn, Wisconsin. And people essentially describe it as looking like a werewolf, or what we would expect a werewolf to look like.
Wow.
And it's been accused of feasting on roadkill and scaring and attacking. I don't know about attacking people, maybe clawing at their cars would be a more appropriate way to describe it. So, whatever werewolves are, there are modern sightings that do continue. So,
Wow.
they're not necessarily an ancient, European legend, or there might be something more to it. Who knows?
And those are probably in wooded areas?
Yeah, mostly in rural areas. There haven't, Elkhorn is actually Bray Road, which is the main drag that this creature supposedly haunts, is a very rural road. I've been there, did an investigation about a decade ago, and lots of farms and cornfields and things like that. So
Have you ever had any
wooded areas.
Have you ever had any sightings yourself on any of these?
No, I never have.
No.
Never seen any of these things.
Now, Ken, I collect a lot of antiquities and stuff, and I come across some vampire hunting kits. Have you ever seen a werewolf hunting kit?
I never have, but I imagine there's one out there somewhere.
Yeah.
It probably wouldn't be too different, Tim, from a vampire hunting kit. It seems like,
Right.
if werewolves are associated with the devil, it seems like you would need some holy water and maybe some crucifixes and
Right,
things
silver.
of that nature, and I guess a few silver bullets as well. But in ancient times, before the Beast of Gévaudan, it was said that you could kill a werewolf any old way. You didn't have to have silver bullets. You could kill it with a musket or a spear, or burn it, or whatever you had to do. It was flesh and blood.
Now, did the vampire legends and the werewolf legends, did those pretty much originate around the same time periods? In Europe?
I think both legends are actually, speaking of antiquity, I think you're talking about, all of these legends probably have their basis in previous mythologies that date back thousands of years.
Right.
For example, looking at werewolves, you have the Egyptian god Anubis, which was essentially a dog-headed or a jackal-headed man-like creature. Vampires, I'm not as knowledgeable about vampire lore and history, but I imagine you have vampire-like creatures in different cultures that date back thousands of years, and it's probably very similar with werewolves. So,
Right.
I think it's something that's been with us, for millennia, and they've evolved. As our cultures have evolved, they've evolved with different characteristics.
Great.
Any other questions on
Nope.
that? Okay, so let's move on to Bigfoot. Love Bigfoot.
Well, everyone loves Bigfoot. Bigfoot's the star of TV, movies, commercials, you name it. And in fact, the popularity of Bigfoot seems to be growing quite a bit, which is pretty cool in my mind, at least. Bigfoot is probably, of all the monsters that we've talked about so far, Bigfoot, in my opinion, potentially a real living animal. At least that's how I feel, and that's how many people feel. Despite the fact that most people have heard about Bigfoot in more of a fictional sense. There are thousands of reports of a creature that is essentially 6.5 to 7 to 9 feet tall, very muscular, broad shoulders, no neck, kind of a conical shaped head, very hairy, covered in hair, and it seems to have characteristics of primates, somewhere between apes and humans. It walks on its hind legs, of course. It's bipedal. It has very long swinging arms. It smells bad. And people have reported it all over the place, mostly in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, Northern California up to Oregon, Washington, and Western Canada and Alaska. But there are sightings in the eastern states, places like Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas, Oklahoma, Michigan, you name it, New York. The sightings are all very similar. And moreover, other than sightings, we actually have other evidence too. In fact, I have a collection, and many researchers have a collection of casts that are indicative of the footprints or tracks that have been left behind by Bigfoot. And, what we've made these casts by pouring plaster or other materials into an impression in the ground and then lifting it out. And by studying these casts, you can actually study the physiology and morphology of the foot. And there are some characteristics and clues there in some of these casts that are very, telling and potentially very authentic and real.
Now, Ken, someone in chat just asked, do you think that Bigfoot is a primates species?
Absolutely, no doubt. In fact, Bigfoot is more than likely a hominid, meaning that it belongs to the family that includes humans and some of our closest relatives, such as, Neanderthal man, Homo erectus, Homo habilis, and so forth. I mean, it's definitely, it walks on its hind legs. Many people have described its face as looking very human-like. It seems to be highly intelligent, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a primate, but moreover, it's probably very, very closely related to us.
Now, the American Indian believe that it's interdimensional.
I think that's a yes and no sort of statement, Noreen. I mean, it's true that many Native Americans believe them as sort of spirit beings, but then they also believe that about many other animals as well. So, there are other tribes, for example, that consider them simply to be another tribe that lives deep in the woods and they're covered in hair, or some type of animal. So, I think it's different from tribe to tribe, from culture to culture. But the important thing is that virtually every culture and every tribe of Native Americans believed in some type of being like Bigfoot.
Now, Bigfoot supposedly.
Very strong evidence.
Okay, now Bigfoot. I understand that Bigfoot, when they travel in packs. They're not loners. But yet, when people have a sighting of Bigfoot, it's always a single ape person. Why is it only singular? Is that one person? Is that one ape man going out and doing scouting? And that's when they see him?
That's an interesting theory, Noreen. I mean, you bring up a good point, because primates, which includes, of course, humans and the great apes, monkeys, and so forth, are very social. We're all very social animals, and we're very nurturing. So typically when you have gorillas, you have a family of gorillas, or a family of humans, but it's true that most people that have sighted Bigfoot have only seen single creatures, although there have been reports of at least pairs of creatures, and sometimes what appears to be a female Bigfoot with an infant in tow. But they do seem to be very solitary, I think, compared to humans, and I honestly believe that's one of the reasons they've been so hard to locate, is that they're highly intelligent. They choose to live in very remote wilderness areas that humans don't go. They're very nocturnal, seen mostly at night, although sometimes during the day. And they're very nomadic and also solitary, so that they've evolved, and this is just my opinion, that they've evolved over thousands of years solely to avoid us as humans, because we are probably their greatest threat.
someone in the chat asked a question that I've never heard of before. They said that they have heard of some genetic testing that was done in the 20s and 30s. Have you heard anything about this being some type of, like the Bigfoot being an aberration of these experiments?
Well, there's a theory out there that Stalin, the Russian dictator, was actually conducting experiments to crossbreed humans with apes in order to create a super race of soldiers.
Oh my God.
He was never successful, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it's a great story.
Yeah, it is. Oh my God.
Scientists trying to, but humans and other primates were just not genetically close enough to breed or to combine characteristics. It could never happen.
Now what about
that is a theory,
Now what about Texas veterinarian Melba Ketchum, who says that she has DNA to prove that he is part of the human race?
Now that's an interesting and sort of breaking story. You're right. Melba Ketchum is a geneticist here in Texas where I live, and she has been apparently working on sequencing Bigfoot DNA and has, according to her, sequenced 3 genomes successfully of a creature that she believes to be Bigfoot. And this has been big news in the Bigfoot community. Now, it's become a little bit confusing because she did not release the information by her, of her own volition. It was leaked out from another source, and she's never officially released her papers or her work. In some ways she seems somewhat credible, but then in other ways it just seems like she hasn't really handled the situation very well, which is frustrating to a lot of Bigfoot researchers.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So, we're certainly hopeful that she may have actually come up with a result, but I mean, there are many questions. For example, where did she get this alleged Bigfoot DNA? And is there going to be a situation where there's actual peer review or other, because that's what it's going to take for the general public and for scientists to take a look at this thing, or other scientists to come forward and essentially review her work. And, at this point that hasn't happened. But, there is hope. I mean, there is a possibility that there is Bigfoot DNA and that she has sequenced it successfully. So, I guess it's just one of those things we're going to have to wait and see what happens.
Now, Ken, have you done, I'm starting to get away from the Bigfoot subject, but have you done any research on the Nightcrawler, which is the alien-like stick figures that have been seen in Yosemite and Fresno?
No, I haven't. I've heard of them, and I'm familiar with that, but no, I haven't done any research on that personally.
Okay, I was just curious.
It's cool. There's a lot of cool stuff like that out there, Tim, that people have reported, and we could have a show. We could last for hours and hours here talking about all these fabulous creatures and monsters. Some of them may have scientific validity, some of them may not. But many of them, in my opinion at least, are kind of supernatural or paranormal constructs, maybe interdimensional. Who knows?
Yeah. Now, they've never found a Bigfoot body, and I've talked about this often, why they never find a body. I always believe that Bigfoot buried their dead. So I don't know. What is your theory on why would they never find Bigfoot bodies? Because obviously they die.
That is one of the really frustrating aspects of the whole mystery, is why hasn't anyone come up with a body? And it seems like at this point someone would have. But you're right, that's a good theory. A lot of people believe that they do bury their own dead, that they're highly intelligent. It goes back to what I was saying earlier, that they want to avoid being discovered by humans because they feel they would be wiped out. Neanderthals apparently buried their dead and also had religious ceremonies, somewhat pseudo-religious ceremonies. What people need to understand is that finding bodies is not as something that is very common in terms of, large animals. I mean, people that have been hiking in the woods may occasionally find bones or, a deer carcass or something like that. But the comparison we always make in the Bigfoot field is that to bears. Bears, of course, we know exist. They probably outnumber Bigfoot by an enormous ratio. ask people that have worked in wild game reserves or national parks where bears are very prevalent, like Yosemite and Yellowstone and places like that, bear remains are never found by anyone. When a bear dies, its remains, and this is true to all animals, its remains disappear very quickly. You have scavengers that come in, you have insects and parasites, the bones are scattered, so it's a pretty remarkable thing if you were to actually find any type of large animal carcass out in the woods. It's a very, very remarkable and rare thing. So, it could be a situation where we just haven't been in the right place at the right time yet.
Now, Ken, what? I once found a pair of Bigfoot tracks up in Yosemite. We have a cabin up there, and at the time, it was out in the middle of nowhere. It was on a fire, one of those fire roads that the National Park Service uses. But what should one do if they come across something, like either tracks or what they think are remains? Like, who should they contact so the proper documentation can be done to get whatever it is, across? Who should they contact?
Well, if they come across remains, they should contact me.
Yeah.
No, call me.
Yeah.
If they find something like a track or hair or something that they think is significant, well, let's start with tracks because those are most common. If they find something that looks like a Bigfoot track, they should document it, of course, right away. Most people now carry a camera either on their phone or with them. If you do take a picture of a Bigfoot track, put something else down next to it that has a recognizable scale, like a set of keys or a wallet or a phone or something that you can use to measure, or determine the size of the track. Try to take some pictures from different angles. If they're able to cast it, that's even better. And again, you can buy casting materials like plaster of Paris, although the preferred material is something called ultracal, which is that's also known as dental stone. They use it in different dental procedures. And essentially it's a plaster-like material. You just add a little bit of water to it until it turns into a glue-like substance. And then you kind of pour it in or spill it into the impression, and then when you come back a few hours later, it's become a hard substrate that you can lift out of the ground. If someone were to find hair that they think belongs to Bigfoot, don't touch it with your bare hand, for God's sake, because you might contaminate it if there's a DNA. Try to lift it off with tweezers or some other instrument and preserve it. And actually, the best place to preserve hair is not in a plastic baggie like most people think. It's actually in a paper bag or an envelope, something that's made out of paper. And if you find Bigfoot droppings, good luck with that one.
Oh. How would you know? How would you know? Have you ever anybody? So I've seen where people say, "Oh, show a picture of it," but how do they know?
Not as common as you think, and it's funny. Just a real quick funny story. I had some people up north that contacted me a year or two ago, and they claimed that they had 50 Bigfoot creatures living on their property, on their little 2-acre property. Which I'm open-minded, so I'm not going to simply poo-poo what they're saying, but they would tell me that there's 50 of these things out on our property. They're peeking out at us from behind trees, and we just can't get a good picture of one. And I said, well, if there's 50 of them on your property, then you must have droppings all over the place. So why don't you go out there and just scoop up some droppings and send those to me, because there's no way you've got 50 Bigfoot creatures running around on your property and you don't have a huge problem. Just think about it. I live in an apartment complex where people walk their dogs, and I can't walk anywhere out there without stepping into a pile of dog.
Oh my God.
Ken, real quick, somebody in the chat was asking, what do you think their diet is? Is it, do you think it's vegetables, or do you think it's like meat, or, what do you think these things eat?
What does Bigfoot eat? Everything.
Okay.
Everything in sight. We're talking about creatures that weigh several hundred pounds. They're always on the move. They're warm-blooded, so they have a very huge metabolism befitting of their stature. So, they eat everything, and they've been reported. People have reported seeing them eating everything
people?
Anything and everything.
He said, hopefully not.
Oh, hopefully not. Okay, yeah.
You know, I've seen,
Hopefully not, yeah.
I've seen pictures from Bigfoot hunters when they go into the woods and they'll see tall twigs kind of shaped into a teepee style, or they'll see a bunch of twigs which they call nesting. Now, how do they know that really came from Bigfoot?
Well, we don't know, but they're not, to be fair, Noreen, they're not twigs, they're branches. And they usually, some of them have kind of some substance to them. We don't know specifically that these are Bigfoot nests or teepees, but what's interesting, and I've found a few of these myself, is that we tend to find them in areas where there have been a lot of Bigfoot sightings. You know, I spend a lot of time in the woods, and I'm not always in areas where there are a lot of Bigfoot sightings, and I never find these structures. But when I go to a location where there have been sightings, it seems like occasionally we'll find one of these things, and they're very distinctive. They look very intricate, like something has, you know, kind of put them together. But we can't prove conclusively. I don't know if anyone has seen Bigfoot actually making one of these things. But it's, you know, it adds to the evidence, to the circumstantial evidence.
Do you think they could get DNA off of those branches?
I don't think so. I don't think that's been attempted. You know, we've tried to get DNA, you know, possibly off a hair if it's got the right materials. Blood is a possibility. Droppings certainly. But you know, I don't think that's a possibility. Now, one of the problems with the DNA testing, of course, is that it's very expensive.
Yeah.
And Bigfoot research is not really being supported by any, you know, universities or government institutions or anything. So, and most Bigfoot researchers like myself are actually, you know, not well-to-do. So, that's kind of a challenge in terms of trying to get things DNA tested.
Any more questions from the chat?
I have a question. Hey, Ken, when are your book? Where can we find the people in the chat? Where can they find your books? And when is your humanoid book? The flying. I think it's called the Flying Humanoids or
Encounters
with Flying Humanoids. Yeah. Well, that's an excellent question, Tim. I'm ready to see that one. All three of my books are available on Amazon.com, as well as other online major book retailers. The newest book, Encounters with Flying Humanoids, Mothman, Man-Birds, Gargoyles, and Other Winged Beasts, that's the full title, is going to be released on September 8th. But you can find it on Amazon right now, and it can be pre-ordered. So that's going to be the best place to get that. And unfortunately, it won't be out until September, but I hope people will check it out because it definitely addresses Mothman and many of these other weird flying humanoid creatures. My other books, of course, are Big Bird, Modern Sightings of Flying Monsters. That's available on Amazon and other online book retailers. And my second book was co-authored with a good friend of mine named Nick Redford, and that book is called Monsters of Texas. And anyone that's interested in the legends and lore of Texas, we cover everything from Bigfoot reports in Texas to the legendary Chupacabra to Big Bird, werewolves, lake monsters, you name it.
Awesome. Do you have a website, Ken?
I'm working on a website. It's not up yet. It's under construction. I will have a kengerhard.com at some point this year. I've actually acquired that URL. Currently, though, the best place to find me or find out about my research is my Facebook fan page. If you go to Facebook and type in Ken Gerhard, Gerhard, cryptozoologist, and like that page, you'll get updates about my research and other articles, and you can check out some cool photos on there as well.
Oh, yeah, awesome. Ken, thank you so much for being our guest tonight on the show. It was a pleasure to have you, and very nice to meet you as well.
Oh, nice to meet you, Noreen. You're a very gracious hostess.
Thank you.
Tim, you're awesome too, brother. Thank you for setting it up and having me on.
Definitely.
I had a great time, and I want to thank everyone who listened in. I have been looking at the chat room and reading your comments, and I really appreciate it. A lot of good questions there. Sorry I couldn't address all of those, but hopefully people will get in touch or, pick up a copy of one of my books.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ken. Good luck with your trip tomorrow, too. Where are you going tomorrow?
Tomorrow I'm going to be at the Texas Bigfoot Conference, and actually it's going to be Saturday in Fort Worth. I'm leaving tomorrow, but anyone that lives in the Dallas-Fort Worth area or anywhere in northern Texas, Oklahoma, that's interested in Bigfoot, I really recommend you come down and check out the Texas Bigfoot conference. It's going to be at the Fort Worth Convention Center. It's a huge event, one of the biggest in the country, lots of Bigfoot enthusiasts and researchers. And this year, the special keynote speaker is Josh Gates from Destination Truth. So we're excited to have him up there. I'll be there along with Nick Redfern and many of the top people in the Bigfoot field, including Dr. Jeff Meldrum.
Awesome. Wow. You have a safe trip. And thank you again so much. It was a pleasure, Ken. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thanks, Ken.
Hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good
Thank you.
night. Good night.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Well, that's great.
Oh, that was
Very
great.
insightful. We never did a monster show before. No, not in a while. Not since I've been on
It's my favorite. I love monsters. Wow. So, everybody, thanks for joining us tonight. Now, you know, since Tim is here, you know what that means. You know what that all means. Second show, it's going to be ITC with Tim.
Yep.
And everybody, please don't forget, give us a like and please subscribe to the channel.
Yeah, the show will be in about 25 minutes. Sorry you guys can't see me right now, but we're sitting down back here. The show will be in about 25 minutes. And also, if you want, we can plug the Virginia City event. We have the in August. We only have, I think,
Is
9.
the flyer up?
We only have 9 rooms available, or
9
9 beds available. So it's gonna be a great conference coming up. It's really cheap, pretty much. You know, it's $100 and includes dinner, 2 ghost hunts, and
ghost hunt at the famous Washoe. You get to sleep overnight with all of us and have fun, and plus you'll be staying at the haunted St. Mary's.
with me.
Oh.
We'll be
with
hanging out. We'll have a good time. Yeah. So, but you guys, check it out. It's all the information's on the store, and we'll be back in about 25 minutes.
Yeah. So if go to livesci-fi.tv, and then there's a tab up top that says store, and that's where you can purchase your ticket. And we're gonna have a lot of fun, and I'm really excited. I'm going, and I'm really excited about that. And anything else, Tim?
Please like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't. We'll see you guys in about 25 minutes.
Okay, wait a minute. For those who aren't coming back, if you don't come back to the ITC, you'll be sorry. You'll be missing something, because our sessions have been freaking awesome.
Freaky, yeah, freaky.
Freaky. But we are having another show on the 21st. We're not going to have one this Saturday, but we will have one on the 21st. And the guest is Andrea Perrone. And she wrote a book called House of Darkness, House of Light. And, oh, bless you, Tim. And they're making a movie out of that book, and it's called The Conjuring.
Yep.
So,
and then we'll be doing the Keddy Resort murders too.
Oh, my God. On Saturday, Saturday,
Very
March
sad
23rd.
Story.
On the 23rd, it's...
And that's what they made the Strangers, the movie Strangers.
No.
Oh, I thought
Everybody thinks they did, but they didn't.
I read that.
It's an unbelievable story, unsolved murders. It's horrible. So it's
I think after the show we're gonna be doing some ITC on the victims. Yeah, it should be kind of crazy.
All
But
right,
so and then I'll be announcing soon, probably in the next week or two, the upcoming live broadcast that we're going to be doing in end of April. Ghost Hunt.
Okay, so thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks for everybody in chat.
We'll
Thanks
see
to
you
the
in
moderators, and we'll see you in about 20 minutes?
Yeah, 20 minutes.
Come back in about 20 minutes for ITC.
And refresh the page, you guys. We'll in about 10 minutes.
Good night, everybody.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye.